our final presentation is actually a demonstration with Sean Hagen from Black Hagen Design. They're going to do a little VR demo that I think you're going to like. So if you would just help me welcome Sean.
Again, my name is Sean Hagen, and my colleague is Bartosz Korek. He's going to be doing the demo with the VR. And we're here today to talk about how the use of virtual reality can be applied to creating design inputs in the product development process. All right, so the basic methodology that I'm going to walk us through is one that we've been using for quite a long time, except that in the analog form, a physical form. And it's a means of generating high-level system architecture design inputs. And when I use the term system architecture, I don't mean just electronic engineering. I mean like the mechanical layout of components and user interfaces. So it's a means of getting user inputs, user needs as part of your design inputs. All right, so first of all, we start off with the concept of context of use. And this is where we get the users involved, as well as the design team, involved in an experiential means of providing preferences and needs through evaluating configuration models in the context of use. So today we're going to be using an OR as that context of use. It could be an ICU, it could be a person's home, it could be an ambulance. It's always going to be different depending on the project. But in this case, we're going to be talking about larger devices that are used in an OR context. Okay, so this method is a means to provide users with configuration alternatives. And this is a very effective design tool or methodology for creating design inputs that are foundational in the system design decisions. This complements other system level requirements or inputs. Examples of those other system level inputs that might happen early in a project are like power management, design for manufacturability, sustainability, and service, those kind of things. So in this case, though, we're creating a methodology that gets the perspective of the user. All right, so a great starting place is another method. It's called Contextual Inquiry for understanding how the current use scenarios work and how the predicate devices are being used in current contexts of use. However, it's not really a good method for testing out new ideas, novel designs, or iterations, next generation type of design progress. You can't really do that with real patients and users. So we need to have an alternative method for that. And until recently, our kind of go-to methodology was to create study models, physical study models. These were a means to illustrate and demonstrate different configurations of components and features that the users interact with. This is something we've been doing for about 26 years, so it's a pretty tried and true process. There are some disadvantages to it, and I'm going to speak to those, whereas you might have advantages by going with a more virtual type of application. And so some of the insights that you can collect with this methodology are listed here. And then there are things like viewing angles and lines of sight and centers of gravity, articulating features that you need to understand how those kinematics interact in the environment of use, as well as the limitations or the needs of the users. All right, so the premise of this methodology is to provide alternative user interface configurations that can demonstrate their impact on the usability of the device in the context of use. And these study models are a much higher fidelity than, say, like a benchtop brass board or breadboard, because you're trying to reduce any kind of noise at the fidelity of the model in order for the users to not have to imagine how something might work. So we have to basically create what I say is more akin to a prop. In other words, it's an illusion of it working like a production product, but it's absolutely not based on production methods or processes. So it could be as simple as just understanding the difference between orientation. What dimension is most important? Height, depth, width. It could be just even more simple, portrait or landscape. So just understanding why one is more important than the other from the patient's point of view is instrumental in guiding a lot of the design inputs later on. So the downside of doing this type of process with these physical models is that you basically have to engineer this prop. You have to design it, engineer it, fabricate it, debug it. You got to keep in mind that end users are going to be manipulating this thing and playing with it, so they're going to break everything if you don't make it super robust. And all that design and engineering for these props is basically a throwaway because these are not iterations of the design. They're nowhere akin to being a prototype. They're just a means to demonstrate different feature sets that are oriented and configured differently. So that is a pretty big downside. You have a lot of time on the engineering of these like latches and swivels and things that adjust. Now, granted, you're not constrained by materials and manufacturing processes, but you do still have to engineer these things. And it's not something that translates to the final device design because you're just coming up with the requirements of what these user interfaces need to look like. So when we switch over to a virtual version of this methodology, we pretty much can keep all these different inputs or these insights. We can still capture these, with the exception of two. Viewing angles, it's different from line of sight. Line of sight is can you see it from where you need to see it from, or can other people see you, those kind of things. Viewing angle is a technical issue with the display itself. Where you're standing, can you actually read the display? Now, a few years ago, it was a much bigger deal. Technology has totally improved such that most of the displays we deal with now don't have any issues with viewing angle. But my point is you can't really simulate that in a virtual space. It's going to be more like this image here where you have a static representation of a display. It doesn't have to be static. You can actually have it animate. It could have waveforms on it and all that good stuff. And even touchscreens are starting to, it's not quite there yet, but it's getting there. So the only thing is that it's not representing the viewing angle of that component, that LCD or whatever that display component is. So I don't think that's a super big one. One that's a little more important, more impactful to certain design projects is portability. What we used to do with these things, as you can see in this image in the upper right, is we would weight them and make sure the center of gravity is correct. And that way the users can evaluate that portability. That's not really capable yet in the VR space. There is some feedback in the gloves, but it's nothing like what you would need for this. So that's probably one limitation for like wearables and handheld instruments is probably not going to be applicable. And then the rest of them are still applicable. So, and in fact, in some ways, it's more efficient because you can iterate much quicker and have a lot more features that change from concept to concept because you're not engineering all those features. You do have to put kinematics in it, but it's allowing you to manipulate things in context of use without having to engineer and fabricate all these things. All right, so we're going to go through kind of an example today. I will remind you, we have a little bit of limitation on the stage. The stage is not the same size as an OR, so I don't want Bartosz, doing a stage dive here, so we're going to limit some of the things he can do. But the idea is that, let's say that we're developing a new surgical robot, and we have a big technical advantage over some competitors in that it's really small, has a really small footprint, and we want to verify how that's going to work in the context of use, the ORs that it would be in. Now, you could just do a 2D exercise like this. And each of those squares is a foot. It's a very small footprint. It looks like it fits just fine into this surgical space. And where the clinicians are standing, they still look like they can be functional. And that's great, except that it doesn't inform you at all with regards to all the kinematics that this device might have. So it's all two-dimensional. Even if you do it in CAD, it's still a static image. It's all perfectly to scale, but it's not actually experiential. You're not doing it yourself. And the advantage here is that when we switch over to the virtual space, when we did those physical models, we would have to go into a simulated OR to get that context of use. Here, we don't have to schedule that time. And so that means that anybody on the development team can go through this experience whenever they want, as opposed to having to schedule time in a simulated OR somewhere, bring your equipment in there and simulate a study. Same thing with the recruiting of the end users. You do have to bring them to you because there's special headgear and gloves and software. It's part of the game world, so that's getting less and less of a barrier, but it's still there. It's going to be much like any other usability evaluation where you recruit the users and have them come to your facility. So back to our example here with the robot, it looks like it's pretty well integrated into the sterile field. So let's take a look at what that might be like in a virtual environment. So the robot's being maneuvered into place. This is called docking the robot. And you can see that he's taking a look on the ground where there's the footprint of IV poles and drug infusion pumps, making sure you're not running into those. Can't run into the overhead equipment, the monitor in this case that the first assist on the other side has to be able to see. And then you have a person that you're running into. So evidently this circulating nurse is a really good friend of that surgical assist, drags him out of the way. And right now the end effector is still not over the surgical site. All right, so now it's in the right place to be functional, but we no longer have room for that person there. So in that 2D world, we had, back to 2D yet. So here it looked like that person fit, but in fact they don't. They're looking at the back of a monitor, and we can't really move that monitor. I'll kind of demonstrate, actually, Bartosz is going to demonstrate later why you can't do that, because there's a surgeon in a cockpit over here, a controlling cockpit that controls the robot, and they need to be able to see the sterile field. Now you learn those kind of details from doing the contextual inquiry up front, what those needs are in a big picture. And here we're evaluating more minutia in the design iterations and configurations. So you might have 3 or 4 different versions of this robot, try them each out to see whether you can solve any of those problems. What you first thought was a big advantage, a really small footprint, it's only 2 feet by 2 feet, doesn't seem to make a difference as far as keeping that clinician on that side of the bed. All right. So you are required to invest some time into the environment itself, creating that OR space. And I'll have a slide at the end to kind of give you some resources on where you can get some of the equipment. I will give you a heads up though, not all the equipment that you buy online, like say the anesthesia cart or a drug infusion pump or something like that, there's different flavors of those. So some of them you can edit and add kinematics to, and some you can't. So you need to be aware of that. And then of course your configuration models, you're going to design yourself. And then the environment, like I said, is reusable. And in fact, what we're doing is we're creating virtual ORs for all the hospitals that we visited over the last 20 years. So we'll have a library of different hospitals we can try out products, because even within one hospital, the ORs aren't the same. So having that as a resource to evaluate your concepts is a big value. So how do we start off the process? So the planning part looks something like this. We're gonna list what are some of the things that we know, like where it has to go, what steps are for setting it up. In some products that might be loading disposables. Others it might be taking it off of a cart and putting it onto a shelf. Whatever those scenarios are, you want to kind of list those out and then storyboard them. So here I've started kind of more of a diagrammatical storyboard where we first bring it into the room. In this case, this particular OR, the automated drug dispensing cart is actually on the left-hand side of the anesthesiologist. So it would actually be in the way if you're bringing in this robot. And the whole premise, our fictitious robot here, is that because it's small and has such a small footprint, it doesn't have to be stored in the OR, and it can move from OR to OR. So our first step is we got to bring it into the OR. So as they bring it in, this drug cart's in the way, so we're going to have to move the drug cart out of the way, and then we can dock it, and then we have to check all the lines of sight. So once you get it in, you've moved stuff around, you've added things to the OR, you have to make sure that all the clinicians in the room have the lines of sights that they require to be safe. All right, so these are the resources that I was mentioning earlier. This first one is a service provider. If you don't have the resources in-house like we do to do it yourself, you can hire somebody else to do it for you. They also do prettier versions. I mean, we're using this as a tool, so we haven't rendered all the things that are in that OR because that doesn't help us with our evaluation. It just adds weight to the model and makes a much bigger file. But they can do that if you want something that's more promotional in nature. And then the engine that we're using is this Unreal engine. That's what we create the environment in and the simulation. And then stock models come from a couple of different resources, and I've listed those there. Again, just be cautious that you're buying a model that you can edit and add kinematics. Okay, at this point, Bartosz, when you come up. So we're going to go through some of the scenario where he's trying to first try to get the robot into the room. Hopefully there's enough runway to do that. And then he's going to switch hats and become the anesthesiologist and have to move the cart out of the way. But you'll see a lot of the different, we'll demonstrate a lot of the kinematics that the cart, on the cart, so you can see him open drawers and adjust displays and things like that. So you can imagine how that translates. Ready. I'll watch it. So this would be the role of the circulating nurse. In some places it might be a tech, brings it in from storage. So now he sees that the drug dispensing cart is in the way. So he just teleported over to where the anesthesiologist is because we don't have a big enough room here. And now he's going to have to move that cart out of the way. So this is an automated drug dispensing cart. At Tampa General, it's on the left-hand side, so that would have to be moved out of the way. And the problem with pulling that into the anesthesiologist's space is you got to be able to open drawers. So he's looking around. That's a drug infusion pump. There's the patient. It's back to the cart. Now he has to demonstrate that you can still open the drawers. So these are the controlled drugs on the top. And see how close he's getting. He had to move the stool out of the way. And then other medications are down here. So he only has a foot between that drawer and the anesthesia machine. So that kind of gives you a heads up on what the impact of having to move that out of the way just to get this robot in. There's also cord management involved. We don't have that kind of fidelity in this, but we've done that in the past. In real life, this would be something the anesthesiologist would be pretty unhappy about because they're managing a bunch of cords in addition to this. Okay, So now we'll check out the line of sight of the anesthesiologist. He's got to be able to see the surgical field. And then we have that line of sight of the first assist. He's got to be able to see that monitor. And so depending on how tall he is, he might not be able to. And then switch over to the surgeon. So the surgeon is back in the corner. The surgeon has to be able to see the sterile field as well, which it looks like we're good. And then can you teleport back to anesthesiology? Okay, so the anesthesiologist needs to be able to look over the curtain. Has to be able to look over the curtain of the ether screen and be able to see what's going on over there as well. And that looks pretty good. The robot's taking up basically the same space as a person. So what we've done in the past is we'll put these on as designers, experience it ourselves, and then also have end users come in and try it out and give us what their input is as far as their concerns on where the kinematics might be running into other things, or how we might have the OR laid out unrealistically, etc. All right. And then another thing that we might do is we have a teleconference with people that can't come to actually don the gear and just have them direct the person to try different things out that they are concerned with. So it's not quite the same hands-on first-person experience, but it is still of value. All right, so trying to keep it a little brief because we started about 15 minutes late. Is there any questions at this point? Right. So the question was, make sure I get this right. How often or how long does it take to do iterations? Yeah. So now that's an excellent question because there is a big difference between the physical models and the virtual models when it comes to iteration. Iterating the physical models probably take twice as long, if not longer, because you have to refabricate them, rebuild them, modify them, etc. Whereas in the virtual space, you can make quick changes. It's a very light CAD model, and you don't have to basically re-engineer a new product. So it could be orders of magnitude. Anyone else?
I was just wondering how the time and cost of developing a model like this compares to actually booking out the space in real life and going in and testing it.
I can't hear.
Oh, I was just wondering how the time and cost of putting together a model like this compares to the equivalent of having to go physically to book out the OR space.
Yeah, I'd say that time is half engineering this model.
Thank you.
Not the environment, just the model. Yeah, it could be at half the time to do the virtual model. The environment takes a long time. That can take a week. But the actual models that you're evaluating, you can have that CAD done. So say it takes 2 weeks to do the CAD for both of them. Then the one that's physical takes another 2 weeks to engineer all the features, and then another 2.5 weeks to fabricate it. So you can see that it's significant time savings.
It really depends on the complexity of the interaction.
Yeah, how many things you want kinematic?
In terms of hospitals that have implemented this, what are the success factors? What hospitals or operating rooms have been better at adopting this technology, and what are the benefits they've seen quicker than, say, the rest?
Good question. So the question is, what hospitals have benefited to this process and how? We actually don't work for any hospitals, but it's a good idea. And we've talked to a few that are looking into using some of these same methodologies used for product development in their processes and patient safety programs, risk management programs. But I'm not sure if there's any hospitals actually doing this. They might be doing it for training, but I'm not aware of it. So this is our typical scenario is a company hires us to develop a new widget or a completely novel new widget. And so this is just part of our development process as a fee-for-service consultant. All right. No more questions? Valerie?
Can you configure it for multiple reuse?
Yeah, we do that for both kinds of models where they're kind of like Mr. Potato Heads. We can switch out monitors. We can not have a monitor. We can switch out doors, different size drawers. So you can make one model that's configurable, or in this case, you might be just as fast to make multiple models in the virtual space.
So if you have like a device manufacturer that's working on a number of different products, he could use this in different configurations, the same.
Right, and that is the advantage of it. The whole point of it is that you're presenting alternative configurations. So one might be deeper, one might be wider, one might be taller, one might have adjustable display, one might not. All those kind of things, and you want to be able to go through the same use scenario with each one.
That makes sense.
And it's not a beauty contest. You're not picking A, B, and C. You're picking feature set here and a feature set there, and those all become inputs to the system's architecture. Great, thank you.
Okay.